The words came across the dinner table like a slap. "You'd be nobody without my name," Nathan said, laughing as he reached for his wine glass. His mother nodded from her seat at the head of the table, her smile sharp and approving. "That's absolutely true," Eleanor added, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. "Marrying into this family gave you status, dear. You should remember that." The dining room went completely silent. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I looked around the table at Nathan's brother Cameron, his wife Diane, his cousin. Everyone heard it. Nobody spoke. Nathan smirked at me like he'd just told a clever joke. Eleanor poured herself more wine as if she'd simply commented on the weather. My face burned hot. But I forced myself to smile, to nod slightly, to swallow the humiliation along with my food. But something inside me cracked in that moment. Because this wasn't just an insult. This wasn't a tasteless joke that went too far. This was how they truly saw me. An accessory, a borrowed identity. A woman whose worth came entirely from the surname she carried. I waited for someone to defend me. Anyone. Cameron suddenly became very interested in his plate, cutting his steak into smaller and smaller pieces. Diane excused herself to check on dessert, even though we hadn't finished the main course. Nathan's cousin pretended to answer a text message that hadn't made any sound. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. Eleanor smiled at me across the table, completely satisfied. She'd said exactly what she wanted to say, and nobody had stopped her. Nathan reached for the breadbasket casually, like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just told everyone at the table that I was worthless on my own. The betrayal hit me harder than the actual insult. These people who'd smiled at me for years, who'd celebrated holidays with me, who'd called me family. Not one of them said a word in my defense. I took a sip of water to clear my throat. I smiled faintly, keeping my face neutral and pleasant. But something fundamental had shifted inside me. Something that could never be put back the way it was before. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the early days of our marriage, replaying moments I'd buried. How Nathan had gently suggested I take his last name for unity. How it would be simpler for both of us to share one name professionally. I'd hesitated back then. My maiden name was Hartley. 3 generations of women in my family had kept that name proudly. My grandmother had been Catherine Hartley. My mother was still Anne Hartley. But Nathan had been so persuasive, so loving about it. "It's tradition," he'd said, holding my hands. "It shows we're a real team." Eleanor had been even more direct during a pre-wedding lunch. "The Whitmore name carries weight in this community. You'd be foolish not to use it. Think of the doors it opens." I'd changed my name 6 months after the wedding. Looking back now, lying awake in the dark, I realized that was when the subtle erasure had begun. At parties, Eleanor introduced me as Nathan's wife before ever mentioning my career. My achievements became what our family accomplished. I'd ignored every red flag. The next morning, I confronted Nathan in our bedroom while he was getting ready for work. "What you said last night was humiliating," I told him, keeping my voice steady and clear. He barely looked up from his phone, scrolling through emails. "What did I say?" he asked, genuinely distracted. "That I'm nobody without your name, in front of your entire family." He laughed, actually laughed like I'd said something absurd. "Come on, don't be so sensitive. It was just a joke. You know how dinner conversations go." I stood there, waiting for him to look at my face and realize I wasn't laughing, wasn't smiling. He finally put his phone down on the dresser and sighed like I was being incredibly difficult. "Look, my name did open doors for you. That's just reality. My family has connections. You've benefited from that network." He said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, like emotional abuse was a favor he'd done me, like I should be grateful for the humiliation. "I had a career before I met you," I said quietly, carefully. Nathan shrugged, already picking his phone back up. "Sure, but let's be honest about what level you were at then versus now." Then he said the sentence I would never, ever forget. "If you ever left, you'd have nothing." The words landed like stones. Heavy, final, absolute. He didn't say it with anger or as a threat. He said it like he was stating an obvious fact. Like he was pointing out that the sky was blue or water was wet. He truly believed it. Believed I was completely dependent on him. That without his name, his connections, his family, I would simply cease to exist in any meaningful way. I didn't argue back. I didn't try to prove him wrong in that moment or defend myself. Something smarter took over, something quieter and more strategic than my hurt feelings. I decided not to fight. I decided to observe instead. Over the next week, I started paying careful attention to patterns I'd been too close to see clearly before. How Nathan introduced me at events and networking functions, how credit was distributed for projects we'd worked on together, how decisions about my career were discussed as if they were family decisions, not mine alone. The evidence was everywhere once I started actually looking for it. I'd been erased so gradually, so gently, that I hadn't noticed it happening. I began keeping detailed notes in a private document on my laptop. At a charity gala on Thursday, Nathan introduced my fundraising work as something we've been passionate about. At a business dinner on Saturday, he mentioned our success in launching a mentorship program I'd designed entirely myself, alone, without his input. When colleagues sent emails specifically praising my work, the responses always came from Nathan's email address, thanking them on behalf of the Whitmore family. I went through my professional profiles with fresh eyes. Every achievement listed my name as Catherine Whitmore, with parenthetical mentions of projects, but no clear separation between my work and his work. My own accomplishments had been absorbed into his identity so completely that even I had trouble seeing where I ended and he began. Even my LinkedIn connections seemed to assume I worked for his company when I had my own independent consulting practice. Then I was looking through old files in my home office, searching for a contract, and found something I'd completely forgotten existed. A box of documents from before the marriage. The box was dusty, pushed to the back of my filing cabinet. Inside were licenses, certifications, contracts, awards, all under my maiden name, Catherine Hartley. I pulled everything out slowly, spreading the papers across my desk. Catherine Hartley had earned 2 degrees, graduating top of her class both times. Catherine Hartley had won 3 major industry awards before age 30. Catherine Hartley had built a substantial client base and a solid reputation, completely independent of the Whitmore family. I'd forgotten her. Or maybe I'd been quietly encouraged to forget her over years of subtle conditioning. I found my old business cards from 7 years ago. Simple, elegant, professional, Catherine Hartley, strategic consultant. No husband's name, no family connections mentioned anywhere. Just my credentials and my work. I remembered the confidence I'd felt handing those cards out back then, the pride in building something entirely myself. When had I stopped feeling that way? I looked at my current business cards, pulling one from my wallet. Catherine Whitmore, in elegant script. Underneath, it mentioned my connection to Whitmore Industries, even though I'd never actually worked there. I hadn't even noticed when that addition appeared. An idea began forming in my mind. Quiet and dangerous and thrilling. What if I tested something? What if I tried using my maiden name again, just once, and saw what happened? The following week, there was a professional networking event across town. Nathan was traveling for business, gone until Friday. I decided to attend the event alone. At the registration desk, I hesitated for just a moment, pen hovering over the name line. Then I wrote clearly, Catherine Hartley. The woman checking people in smiled and handed me a name badge. I stared down at it, my maiden name in bold black letters. It felt like putting on old clothes that still fit perfectly, maybe even better than before. I walked into that event as Catherine Hartley for the first time in years, and something extraordinary happened, something I hadn't expected. People listened differently when I spoke. When I introduced myself and described my work, they responded to me directly, not to a family name they recognized. They asked about my methods, my experience, my ideas. A venture capitalist asked detailed questions about my consulting approaches. A nonprofit director requested my card for a potential collaboration. A university professor invited me to speak at an upcoming leadership conference. All of this happened without Nathan present, without the Whitmore name attached to anything I said. The respect was immediate and real, and based entirely on my expertise. Doors opened because I knew what I was talking about, not because of who I'd married. The lie Eleanor and Nathan had built started to crack. But Eleanor must have sensed something shifting in me. Over the next few weeks, she became noticeably more aggressive. She showed up at our house unannounced, walking in without knocking, criticizing how I'd arranged the furniture in the living room. At Sunday dinners, she made pointed comments about my cooking, my clothes, even the tone of my voice when I spoke to Nathan. "You're being very assertive lately," she said one evening, making the word assertive sound like a character flaw. "I hope you're not getting ideas above your station." It was psychological warfare disguised as motherly concern. Deliberate attempts to make me doubt myself. To make me feel like I needed to shrink to be acceptable. Nathan never defended me during these attacks. He'd just shrug afterward and say, "That's how Mom is. Don't take it personally." But it was personal. It had always been deeply, deliberately personal. Then one afternoon, I was in their home office looking for a book Eleanor had borrowed from me. I heard voices from the sitting room down the hall. Nathan and Eleanor, talking in low tones. I froze in the doorway, listening. What I heard made my blood run cold. "She's been distant lately," Nathan was saying, his voice concerned. "More independent. I don't like it." Eleanor's voice was sharp and calculating. "Then remind her what she has to lose. She needs to understand her place in this family." They were talking about me like I was a pet that needed training, like I was a possession that had started acting up and needed to be corrected. "When you take the position in Boston next year," Eleanor continued, "she'll come with you, obviously. It'll be good for her to start over somewhere. She doesn't have any independent connections built up." Nathan agreed, easily, quickly. "Yeah, that makes sense. A fresh start. She can focus entirely on supporting my career there instead of her little consulting projects." They were planning my entire future, where I would live, what I would do, how I would spend my time. My career apparently didn't matter to them at all. My goals weren't even part of the conversation. My consent was simply assumed, not requested or considered necessary. I stood there in the hallway, my hand still on the doorknob, understanding with perfect clarity that I'd been cast as a background character in my own marriage, not a partner, not an equal, an accessory to be managed and moved around like furniture. After that conversation, everything changed for me. I stopped explaining myself to them. When Eleanor made cutting remarks at dinner, I smiled politely and changed the subject without engaging. When Nathan questioned my schedule or where I'd been, I answered briefly without defending my choices or justifying my time. I stopped trying to make them understand me or respect me. Instead, I started preparing quietly, methodically. I opened a separate bank account under my maiden name at a different bank. I gathered financial documents showing exactly what I'd brought into the marriage and what I'd earned independently since. I consulted with a lawyer, quietly, during my lunch breaks about my legal options. I contacted clients I'd worked with before the marriage and let them know I was available for new projects under my original business name. I documented every single instance of Nathan taking credit for my work, emails where I'd sent him ideas that he later presented as his own, meeting notes where my contributions were attributed to him, presentations where he'd used my research without acknowledgement. The evidence folder on my encrypted laptop grew thick with proof. Nathan noticed something was different about me. "You've been quiet lately," he said one evening while we were eating dinner. "Is something wrong? Are you upset about something?" I smiled across the table. "Everything's fine, just busy with work." His eyes narrowed slightly, suspicious. "What work? I thought your schedule was light this month." "I picked up some new projects," I said simply. "Consulting work." But he couldn't identify what had actually changed because I'd stopped performing for his approval. I'd stopped seeking validation from him or his mother. Over the next month, Nathan's vague suspicion grew into something more intrusive and controlling. He started checking my phone when I was in the shower, scrolling through my messages, questioning where I'd been if I came home even 30 minutes later than he expected, asking why I needed my own laptop when we had a shared computer in the office. The irony wasn't lost on me at all. He was behaving exactly like a man who sensed his control slipping away but couldn't figure out why or how. "Who were you talking to on the phone earlier?" he'd ask casually. "Just a client." I'd respond calmly, not looking up from my book. "Which client?" he'd press, moving closer. "A consulting project." "Nothing you need to worry about," I'd say pleasantly. His frustration was visible. I'd stopped giving him detailed reports on my daily activities, my conversations, my plans, and it clearly unnerved him. Eleanor called one afternoon ostensibly to invite me to lunch at her club, but her real agenda became clear within 5 minutes. "Nathan tells me you're being secretive," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "He's worried. Is everything all right in the marriage, dear?" I wanted to laugh at the transparent manipulation. "Everything's fine, Eleanor. Nathan worries too much. He says you're distant, cold. That's not healthy for a marriage." "I'm just focused on my work right now," I replied evenly. They'd both completely underestimated how far ahead I already was. While they worried about my silence and my independence, I'd been methodically removing their control piece by piece. The first concrete, visible step was my name. I logged into my professional email account and changed the display name from Catherine Whitmore to Catherine Hartley. No announcement to anyone, no explanation to Nathan, just a quiet reclamation of my identity. I updated my LinkedIn profile the same way. Catherine Hartley, strategic consultant. I listed all my credentials, my awards, my independent projects in clear detail. The Whitmore family wasn't mentioned anywhere on the page. I changed my business cards, ordering new ones online. I updated my website completely, redesigning it under my original name. I revised my professional documents, my proposals, my contracts. Everything that represented my work now carried the name I was born with. The shift in how I felt was immediate and profound. When I sent emails from catherine.hartley@consulting.com instead of catherine.whitmore@consulting.com, I sat up straighter at my desk. When I attended meetings and handed out business cards as Catherine Hartley, I spoke with more confidence and authority. It sounds simple, almost superficial, just a name change. But names carry enormous power. And I'd forgotten how powerful my own name was until I started using it again consistently. Nathan didn't notice immediately because he never paid close attention to the details of my actual work, but the consequences of that change would find him soon enough. 3 weeks after I'd switched back to my maiden name professionally, Nathan received a confusing phone call. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard his voice rise sharply in the home office. "What do you mean? You chose someone else. We had an understanding about this contract." A long pause while someone spoke on the other end. "Catherine Hartley? Who the hell is?" He stopped mid-sentence. I heard his chair scrape back hard against the floor. He appeared in the kitchen doorway moments later, his face flushed with confusion and growing anger. "Did you apply for the Bridgewater Consulting contract?" he demanded. I looked up from my laptop calmly, taking a sip of coffee. "Yes. They reached out to me last month about it. They just called me, said they're going with Catherine Hartley instead of me. They said she was more qualified for the specific scope of work they need." I set my coffee cup down carefully. That would be me. I use my maiden name professionally now, have been for a few weeks. The confusion on his face would have been funny if it weren't so telling about how little he actually paid attention to my work. He'd assumed the opportunity belonged to him automatically, because in his mind, everything in our shared professional sphere was always his. "Why didn't they call me?" he asked, still not fully understanding what had happened. I met his eyes directly, steadily. "They didn't ask for you, Nathan. They asked for me." For the first time in our entire marriage, I watched Nathan feel invisible, overlooked, passed over for someone else. He stood in the kitchen doorway, trying to process what had just happened. An opportunity he'd assumed was his had gone to me instead, using a name he didn't control, doing work he'd convinced himself and me that I couldn't do without him. "This is my industry," he said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "You're stepping on my professional territory here." I closed my laptop slowly and stood up. "No, Nathan, this is our industry. It always has been. You just convinced everyone, including me for a while, that it belonged only to you." He tried a different approach, switching tactics. "The Whitmore name could have helped you secure that contract more easily. Why would you handicap yourself by using your maiden name?" I picked up my coffee cup and rinsed it in the sink before responding. "Because Catherine Hartley secured that contract just fine. Better than fine, actually. Turns out I don't need your name. I never did." The power dynamic in our marriage shifted visibly in that moment. I could see it in his eyes. The fundamental assumption of my dependence on him had been shattered completely, and panic was starting to replace his usual arrogance. We need to talk about this seriously, he said, his voice changing. There's nothing to talk about, I replied, walking past him. I have a client call in 10 minutes. Eleanor found out within 24 hours. She arrived at our house the next morning, walking in without knocking as usual. What is this I hear about you using your maiden name professionally? She demanded immediately. It's true, I said calmly, not looking up from my work at the kitchen table. You're disrespecting this family. The Whitmore name means something in this community. It has weight and history. I finally looked at her directly, really looked at her. This woman who'd spent years trying systematically to make me smaller. The Hartley name means something too, Eleanor, to me. Her face flushed with genuine anger. After everything this family has given you, this is how you repay us, with this petty rebellion? I stood up slowly, deliberately. What exactly has this family given me, Eleanor, besides a name you constantly use to diminish every accomplishment I've earned myself? She drew back slightly, not used to me speaking this directly or firmly. You've become ungrateful and prideful, she said coldly, her eyes hard. Those are not attractive qualities in a woman. I smiled without any warmth. You're right about one thing. I have become something. I've become done. Eleanor stared at me, genuinely confused. Done with what? Done apologizing for taking up space. Done shrinking to make you comfortable. Done pretending your approval matters to me anymore. The boundaries I'd been too afraid to draw for years suddenly appeared, drawn in steel. That evening, I confronted Nathan with everything I'd been quietly documenting for months. I laid out printed emails showing him taking credit for my work, meeting notes where my ideas were attributed to him in the official minutes, presentations where he'd presented my research as his own insights. This is what our marriage has been, I said, spreading the papers across the dining table systematically. You systematically taking credit for what I built while telling me I'm nothing without you. Nathan tried to deflect immediately. You're taking this out of context. Married couples share success. That's normal. Sharing means both people get credit, I said firmly. This isn't sharing. This is theft. He shifted tactics quickly, trying to gaslight me. You're remembering things wrong. You're being paranoid and creating problems that don't exist. I pulled out more documentation, timestamps on emails, chain forwards showing exactly when and how my name was removed, witness accounts from colleagues who'd been in those meetings. I'm not remembering wrong. I'm finally remembering clearly. Nathan's face hardened, his jaw tight. What do you want from me? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. There. Happy now? I shook my head slowly. It's too late for apologies, Nathan. He looked genuinely confused, almost frightened. What does that mean? I took a breath, steadying myself. Then I made my announcement, quiet but absolutely final. I'm reverting my name legally, back to Catherine Hartley, for everything. All documents, all accounts, all professional registrations. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. Nathan froze completely. You can't do that. I already started the paperwork last week, I said calmly. This is insane. You're my wife. I met his eyes. And I'm also Catherine Hartley. That never changed, even when I tried to forget it for you. Nathan's shock gave way quickly to anger. Over one dinner comment? You're going to destroy our marriage because Mom made one joke? This isn't about one comment, I said, my voice steady. It's about years of being told I'm worthless without you. Years of watching you take credit for my work. Years of your mother treating me like an accessory she can criticize and control whenever she wants. Eleanor, who'd been standing in the doorway listening to everything, stepped forward into the room. You're being dramatic and foolish. This is emotional, not rational. I turned to face her directly. No, I'm being clear. Finally. The room felt charged with tension. Nathan looked between his mother and me, perhaps realizing for the first time that he couldn't have both our approval simultaneously. He had to choose. He chose exactly as I knew he would. You're being completely unreasonable, he said to me, his voice hard, and that was answer enough. Nathan tried threatening me next, his voice low and dangerous. If you do this, you'll regret it. You'll lose everything we've built together. I smiled, and I knew the calm expression on my face unnerved him. Actually, I won't. He stepped closer, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me into backing down. You have no idea how hard I can make things for you. My family has lawyers, connections. We can make your professional life very difficult if we want to. I didn't back away or flinch. Go ahead and try. His certainty wavered visibly. What? I said go ahead. Call your lawyers. Use your connections. See what happens when you do. Eleanor looked between us, confused. What is she talking about? Nathan was starting to understand. What have you done? He asked quietly. I picked up my bag, preparing to leave for a scheduled meeting. I protected myself. Months ago. You just didn't notice because you both stopped paying attention to anything I did that wasn't about serving you. I walked toward the door. Nathan grabbed my arm, not hard but firmly. You're not leaving until you explain what that means. I looked at his hand on my arm, then slowly at his face. Take your hand off me. He did, but reluctantly, his hand dropping. I turned back to face them both. You want to know what I've done? I secured my finances. Every account that was mine before marriage is separate again. Every asset I brought into this marriage is documented and protected legally. Eleanor's face went pale. You can't do that. I can. And I did. I consulted with lawyers 3 months ago. Everything I owned independently is still mine. I looked directly at Nathan. That client list you thought belonged to both of us? Those were my clients before we married. They're working with Catherine Hartley again now. Nathan's face showed he was beginning to understand the full scope of his miscalculation. The intellectual property for my consulting frameworks, I filed for protection under my maiden name. They were all created before marriage, thoroughly documented. I pulled out my phone and showed them a legal document on the screen. Your prenup assumed I had nothing, but I had plenty. I just let you forget that. Eleanor sank slowly into a chair. This is financial betrayal. I laughed, actually laughed out loud. That's rich coming from you, Eleanor. Nathan's anger had turned into something closer to real panic now. You planned this entire thing? No. I protected myself when I realized what you really thought of me. There's a difference. His leverage had evaporated completely, and he knew it. Over the next week, Nathan's entire approach changed dramatically. The threats disappeared completely. Suddenly, he was remorseful, apologetic. I didn't mean what I said at dinner that night, he told me, his voice soft and pleading. I was trying to be funny. I failed badly. I'm so sorry. I didn't respond, just continued packing my things. Catherine, please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling together. Eleanor called with her own version of an apology. Perhaps I was too harsh with you, she said carefully, choosing her words. I only wanted what was best for you, for the family. Their sudden respect arrived only after the power shifted completely. Only after they realized I didn't actually need them. Only after they understood I could leave and take everything I'd built with me. The pattern was pathetically transparent and clear. They'd only valued me once I proved I didn't need their validation or approval. I appreciate the apologies, I told Nathan calmly one evening, but I don't accept them. His face fell. Why not? I'm trying here. Because you're not sorry you hurt me. You're sorry you lost control over me. Eleanor tried intervening again, calling me repeatedly. You're being stubborn. Nathan has apologized sincerely. What more do you want from us? Nothing, I said simply. That's the entire point. I don't want anything from either of you anymore. I moved out 3 weeks later, not in a dramatic rush with broken dishes and slammed doors, but methodically and carefully. I'd found a beautiful apartment downtown under my own name. I packed my things while Nathan watched helplessly from the doorway. This is really happening, he said, more to himself than to me. Yes! Over a name? You're ending our marriage over a name? I stopped packing and looked at him directly, wanting him to understand. It was never about a name. It was about respect, about being seen as a whole person instead of an extension of you. He tried one last time, his voice breaking slightly. I love you. Doesn't that matter? I considered the question honestly before answering. Maybe you do, in your way. But you love the version of me that makes you look good, that stays small enough not to threaten you. I can't be that person anymore. I closed the last box and taped it shut. I need to be Catherine Hartley again, fully, completely, without apologizing for it. Nathan had no response to that. As I walked out the door for the last time, I felt lighter than I had in years. No anger, no bitterness, just clarity. A clean break from a life that had been slowly suffocating me. I didn't slam the door. I closed it quietly, decisively. The way you close a book you finished reading. The aftermath unfolded predictably. Nathan and Eleanor had to explain to their social circle why I'd left. They tried spinning it their way initially, controlling the narrative. She became difficult. She changed. We tried everything to help her. But the truth has a way of spreading, especially in professional circles. Colleagues I'd worked with started sharing their own stories about Nathan taking credit for others' ideas, about Eleanor's controlling behavior at charity events, about how I'd been diminished in professional settings while Nathan rose. A journalist I'd worked with years ago published an article about women reclaiming their professional identities after marriage. She interviewed me as Catherine Hartley. The piece included specific examples of credit theft and emotional manipulation. Nathan's professional reputation took a hit. People started questioning his achievements. Eleanor lost her audience, too. The women she'd controlled through subtle intimidation started setting boundaries. Under my own name, everything expanded. My confidence came back. My career flourished beyond anything I'd imagined. I published research under Catherine Hartley that got recognized nationally. I spoke at conferences without checking if it would embarrass Nathan. 6 months after leaving, I looked at my life and barely recognized it. Not because it was so different, but because it was so much more mine. A year after that dinner, I received an award for innovation in strategic consulting. As I stood on stage accepting it, I thought about Nathan's words. You'd be nobody without my name. The woman presenting read my biography, every achievement listed, all under Catherine Hartley. He'd said I was nothing without his name. Turned out I was the name all along.